Okay, it's time for chapter 15 from the Ghost Grave. Remember in chapter 14, Josh was trying to open the box and he found some money in it. He doesn't know how much. He doesn't even know if it's real money. But then when he went home to get some food and take a shower, he found Aunt Ethel on the floor. So Aunt Ethel hurt her ankle and is on the way. They're on their way to the hospital right now. But what about the box? So let's find out. Chapter 15. We're going to take a little detour again, and we're going to start talking about Mr. Turlip. Mr. Turlip had driven the narrow street beside the Carbon City Cemetery so many times that he felt his car practically steer itself. He used to stop on the side of the road for a few minutes and stare at the spot where the money was buried. But for the last few months, he'd been content simply to drive slowly past, savoring the anticipation of his retirement. On Friday afternoon, he barely glanced at the cemetery, knowing he'd be returning after dark that night to dig up his money. When he was nearly past, his foot slammed on the brake as he swiveled his head to look back. Someone had planted flowers on the grave. His grave. Well, not actually his, of course, but the one he'd chosen. He had carefully researched all the graves, pretending he was writing an article about local history for a magazine. He'd selected the grave with only the initials WMM because nobody could remember who was buried there. Information existed for most of the graves. Even though a fire in 1922 had destroyed all of the official records, most of the graves had been identified by surviving relatives, and the names and dates were recorded in the new cemetery book. Only 2 of the graves contained unidentified people. Mr. Turlip had chosen the most unkempt of those 2 graves. Unkempt means that wasn't taken care of. The one with the smallest marker. There were only initials on the marker, making it unlikely some long-lost relative would arrive. In the months since Mr. Turlip had buried his money, there had never been any evidence of a visitor to the grave. Why would someone have come today of all days? He got out of his car and strode toward the bright patch of yellow daisies. How deep had the person dug? Deep enough to find his box? Surely anyone planting flowers on a grave would stop digging if their shovel struck metal. Wouldn't they? Beads of perspiration popped out on Mr. Turlip's brow. He had to know. He dropped to his knees beside the daisies. Grabbing them in his fists, he yanked them up, roots and all, and discarded them on the grass. Then he began digging furiously with his bare hands, clawing at the dirt and pushing it aside until he had a hole so deep his arms were in clear to his elbows. His fingers closed around something thin and smooth. When he pulled on it, the torn plastic bag pulled loose from the dirt. Mr. Turlip looked at the hole torn in the bag, where the staples had been ripped free. This was the bag that had held his box of money. He was sure of that. Someone had been there, removed the box, and buried the empty bag in the grave. As the ambulance approached the cemetery, I saw a car parked on the side of the road. A man knelt on the grass, digging with his hands in the dirt where Willie's leg had been buried. The yellow daisies lay on the grass beside the grave. My heart leaped to my throat. The man had his back to the road, so I didn't see his face. The ambulance driver kept his eyes on the road and seemed not to notice the man. Uh-oh. It had to be the person who buried the box. Who else would dig in the dirt like a dog, throwing freshly planted flowers aside? He must have gone to the cemetery, seen the daisies, and known that whoever planted them might have accidentally found the box. Now he would discover that the box was missing. I had missed him only by a few hours. What if he had come while I was still there, removing Willie's leg bones? Instead of riding to town in an ambulance right now, I'd be riding in a police car. Calm down, I told myself. He didn't catch me, and he can't find out I took the box. Even if he knows WMM stands for Wilbur Michael Martin, there's no way to link me to Willie. I'm not related to him, and neither is Aunt Ethel. I've never been seen at the cemetery. The man will discover the box is gone, but he can't trace me. When we reached the hospital, Aunt Ethel informed everyone she saw that she was not going to stay there. A nurse whisked Aunt Ethel away to an examining room while an admitting clerk asked me questions about her age and her medical history. Although I felt foolish carrying a woman's purse, I was glad I had brought it because the clerk did need Aunt Ethel's Medicare card and another insurance card. I didn't know Aunt Ethel's birth date, and there were no driver's license in the purse. I had wondered if she had one. Now I was certain she didn't. I couldn't help on medical history either. I had no idea whether she had been sick or healthy all her life. Eventually, the clerk found the information she needed in the computer from a time 10 years earlier when Aunt Ethel had been treated for pneumonia. The admitting clerk said, "When the doctor finishes examining your aunt, he'll come out to the emergency room waiting area and tell you the diagnosis." After the paperwork was done, I found a restroom and scrubbed the dirt and sweat from my hands and face. Then I sat in the emergency waiting room. My stomach growled from hunger, but I didn't see any vending machines, and I didn't want to leave the waiting room to look for a place to eat for fear I'd miss the doctor. Someone had left a newspaper in the waiting room, and I skimmed the headlines without reading the stories. I began to imagine the next day's headlines. Boy dies of hunger in hospital waiting room. The minutes crawled past. I fidgeted thinking about the box I'd found and the man I'd seen at the cemetery. I had left all the doors unlocked and the box on the kitchen table. What if it was full of real money? What if someone went in Aunt Ethel's house and found it? I should have hidden it before I left. Why didn't I think of that? I could have stuck it in the freezer or put it inside my pillowcase or in the clothes washer, any place but sitting on the table in plain sight. What if the medics told their families or coworkers how they'd taken Aunt Ethel Hodge to the hospital? Someone might go to Aunt Ethel's house. Her friends probably knew she'd never locked the door. They'd walk right in and see the box and wonder what it was. How could I have been so stupid as to leave the box unguarded? My imagination took off like a batter who'd laid down a perfect bunt. A bum could knock on the door, asking for work or handout, and when nobody answered, he'd go inside and find the box. The newspaper delivery person might come to collect for this month's papers, and leave with the box. The longer I waited for the doctor, the more certain I became that by the time I got back to Aunt Ethel's house, the metal box and its contents would be gone. I would never find out what it contained or who it belonged to. We had arrived at the hospital at 4:45. By 5:30, I couldn't sit still. My nerves jangled each time a doctor was paged, and I jumped when anyone passed by in the hall. I paced around the waiting room, glancing at the wall clock every few minutes. 5:45. 5:50. New headlines scrolled across my mind. Vandals trash unlocked house. Boy claims mystery box is stolen. At 6:30, a man wearing white scrubs came out. "Are you waiting for Miss Hodge?" he asked. "Yes. How is she?" "I'm Dr. Baker. Are your parents here?" He looked around, obviously hoping to discuss Aunt Ethel's condition with an adult. I said, "They aren't here right now." That was true, even though I knew he meant, were they here in the hospital with me? I added, "I'm her nephew." "Your aunt has a broken ankle. We've put a cast on it. I don't anticipate problems from it, but she's sleepy from pain medication I gave her. I want her to stay here overnight so we can watch her. The ankle should heal fine, but her foot needs to stay elevated for a few days." "Do you think she can go home tomorrow?" "There's no way to know for sure, son. Your aunt is not the most cooperative patient. Are your parents coming right back? I'd like to speak to them." "They'll be gone a while, but I'll tell them what you said." "Eventually." "I have another emergency case coming in. Your parents can talk to a nurse if they have questions. Miss Hodge is being put in room 213, second floor. Is it okay if I go see her?" "Wait until your parents return, then go with them." Dr. Baker hurried off to tend to his other patient. I found an elevator and rode to the second floor. As I followed the room number signs, I passed the nurse's station. A nurse standing behind the counter said, "Visitors under age 16 aren't allowed unless they're with an adult." "My great aunt's in room 213, I said. "I rode here in the ambulance with her, and I have her purse." I held it up. "Could I go in for a minute to give it to her? I promise I won't stay." Are you with an adult? No, I'm the only one here with Aunt Ethel. How old are you? 13. Well, I'd be 13 next month. That was close enough. I gave her my most pleading look. Please, I feel goofy carrying a lady's purse around. The woman's stern expression softened. Go ahead, she said. Take out any money and credit cards before you leave the purse. Your aunt won't need money here, and there's no use tempting a dishonest person. You think someone might steal from a sick person in the hospital? That seemed about as low as anyone could get. It's happened, the nurse replied. Don't stay more than a few minutes. I won't. Thanks for letting me go in. Me? I never saw you. She busied herself with the medicine cart. I walked past the nurse's station and entered Aunt Ethel's room. She lay in bed, her left foot propped on a pillow. Her eyes were closed. Aunt Ethel? I whispered. Her eyes stayed shut. I decided not to wake her up. If I did, she'd only demand to go home. I opened the purse. Aunt Ethel didn't have a credit card, but I removed $18.45 along with the keychain. I wanted to be able to get the mail out of the post office box. I put the purse in the drawer of the bedside stand. Even though I'd taken out the money, she might need the comb, pencil, and notebook, or handkerchief that the purse still contained. I waited a couple of minutes, wondering if Aunt Ethel would wake up. When she didn't, I whispered, I'll take care of Florence while you're in the hospital. I didn't know if she could hear me or not, but I figured Florence was the one thing she'd worry about. I left her room and headed for the elevator. When I got back to the lobby, I realized I had no way to get home. The medics had left as soon as they delivered Aunt Ethel, and I didn't know anyone in Diamond Hill or in Carbon City. Except for Aunt Ethel and the hospital staff, the only person I'd talked to in the entire state of Washington was the man in the Carbon City market, and I didn't know his name. He didn't know mine either. There was nobody I could call to ask for a ride home. Although I'd spent the last hour imagining hordes of people swarming to Aunt Ethel's house, the only friend she had mentioned was Muriel. I didn't know Muriel's last name or where she lived. I knew if I explained my dilemma to the admitting clerk, she would probably find someone to help me, but I didn't want anyone to know my plan to stay at Aunt Ethel's house alone until she got out of the hospital. I found a payphone with a local directory chained to it, then looked up taxis in the yellow pages. It listed only one company. I dialed the number and asked how much it would cost to go from the Diamond Hill Hospital to the far side of Carbon City. $10. Okay, can you come now? 5 minutes later, a yellow and blue taxi pulled up. The driver wore a white turban and spoke halting English, but he understood when I said Carbon City. My mind raced in circles as we drove, the way Charlie used to chase his tail. What a day! I'd never ridden in a cab before, much less an ambulance. I'd never helped a ghost, or dug up bones from a grave, or found a buried box. No wonder I was weary. I'd never stayed alone overnight either, and that part was yet to come. The taxi driver slowed when he drove into Carbon City. Keep going, I said. It's up the hill a couple more miles. As the taxi approached the cemetery, I leaned forward in my seat, looking for a car. It was gone. The daisies still lay in the grass. The man who had pulled them out had not bothered to replant them. I wondered if I should call the police as soon as I got home. From the frantic way that man had been digging, the box I'd removed must contain something valuable. But if it did, why would he have buried it in the cemetery? If it was full of money, as I suspected, why wouldn't he have deposited it in the bank? It didn't earn interest underground. A new thought hit me. What if the box had been stolen? Maybe it didn't belong to this man, and he'd buried it to keep it hidden until he thought it was safe to open it. I decided to force open the box all the way, find out exactly what it contained, and then call the police immediately. I was thinking so hard about the man at the cemetery and the mysterious box, I nearly missed Aunt Ethel's road. At the last second, I said, "Turn there," and the taxi swerved onto the gravel driveway. When we reached the house, the driver looked at the meter. $10, he said. Long way out here. Long way back. I wondered if I was supposed to tip him. It was a long drive for the taxi man, and he would be going back without a passenger. I gave the driver $12, which seemed to please him. As soon as I got in the house, I rushed to the kitchen. The box sat on the table exactly where I'd left it. Relieved, I opened the fridge. It was past 8 o'clock, and I'd eaten only an apple all day. I was so hungry I would have eaten spinach or Brussels sprouts, but I didn't have to. I found a pork chop, some fried potatoes, and green beans left over from yesterday's breakfast. Wishing Aunt Ethel had a microwave, I wrapped my meal in foil and put it in the oven to heat. While I waited for my dinner to get warm, I ate 3 chocolate chip cookies. Dessert first never killed anybody. That's my motto. I was sorely tempted to have a slice of unfinished cake, but I didn't. I wondered if Aunt Ethel's customer had come while I was at the hospital, then left when no one answered the door. 3 times I opened the oven and stuck my finger inside the foil to see if my dinner was hot. On the 3rd try, I gave up and ate everything lukewarm. Even after the cookies, I was too hungry to wait any longer. How did Aunt Ethel survive without a microwave? I would have made a rotten pioneer. I ate right out of the foil, one less dish to wash. I washed my fork and glass, then picked up the metal box and headed for the barn. The end. Okay, so now we know that Mr. Turlip knows that someone stole the box. Now he doesn't know who it is, but is there a clue that Josh left that would tell him how to figure out who left it? Think about that, because Josh did leave a clue. And now Josh has to go back by himself. So he has this mystery box, and he has to spend the night by himself out in the middle of nowhere. It's getting exciting. Okay, I will see you next time.